Good Wednesday afternoon, Delmarva. This is meteorologist Chris Mastrobuono live from the First Alert Weather Center as we continue to track dangerous Hurricane Milton as it barrels towards Florida. Now, whether you have family down there, property down there, we thought this would be of interest to you. And this is the big main story in the weather world as things are quite quiet and boring, so to speak, here in the Delmarva region from a weather standpoint. We continue to see blue skies, pleasant, beautiful conditions, but down here towards Florida, yes, conditions are going downhill rather quickly. Now, taking a live look at Milton, this is the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center, moving northeast at 17 miles an hour, and you can see it from the last image. Doesn't look as impressive as it did last night when it was a Category 5 hurricane, had that well-defined eye, but it is encountering some drier air in the backside of it. You can see still packing gusts of 170 miles an hour. The pressure is going up a bit, but we are still dealing with a dangerous Category 4 hurricane as it barrels towards the western coast of Florida, expecting to make a landfall here in about 10 to 12 hours or so. We are looking at a landfall sometime between about 11 tonight and around 1 a.m. Now, if we take a look at the latest satellite imagery, you can see many bands of rain well ahead of the center. You can see the center right here, still hundreds of miles off the coast, but you can see all these heavy bands of rain barreling into Florida. And in fact, we are beginning to see tornadoes develop. Numerous tornadoes have been caught on camera. These bands are forming off the outer bands of the system, and you can see all this wind energy pushing onto the Florida coast. So, last-minute ditch efforts to evacuate are being hindered by these heavy rain bands as well as the tornadic activity. And so there's the whole state of Florida is actually in a tornado watch, and you could see these hurricane watches as well as tropical storm warnings and hurricane warnings as well. Now, if we take a look at the water vapor imagery, you can see these tan color shadings you see back here. That is the drier air. You can see it's kind of a lopsided look, but still, despite the weakening to a degree, I mean, we're still dealing with a Category 4 hurricane here, and it's going to be posing some catastrophic effects for the western coast of Florida, as you'll see here momentarily as we take a look at the storm surge. Now, as we take a look at the latest track from the National Hurricane Center, you see by 8 o'clock tonight, it does get downgraded to a Category 3 hurricane, so still a major hurricane, and we are looking at a landfall somewhere either between about Tampa to Fort Myers. Now, the National Hurricane Center kind of honing in on the Sarasota, Port Charles area, and you can see it maintaining hurricane strength as it passes through the center of the state, just to the south of Orlando, and then over Melbourne. So hurricane force winds are going to be felt throughout the entire state as well as the Atlantic side. So we're going to feel effects on both coastlines with the system, with obviously the worst effects being felt just to the south of Tampa Bay. But needless to say, Tampa Bay is going to be seeing some very damaging winds as well as a catastrophic storm surge there. Now, as we take a look at the storm surge, in fact, the storm surge, the latest forecast right now, you can see from the National Hurricane Center up to a 12-foot storm surge forecasted for the Tampa Bay area. But then just south of that is where we expect that 10 to 15, up to 15-foot storm surge. So that is just a life-threatening catastrophic surge. And then to the south of that, you'll see generally about 12 feet, but there you see on the Atlantic side still a 5-foot storm surge, so that is certainly not something to mess around with. So once those winds shift out of the east, that water is going to be forced up into the coast. Now, as we zoom in here closely, here's Tampa. So you can see generally about 8 to 12-foot storm surge there, but then from Sarasota to the south. So we expect the worst storm surge just to the southeast of the eye. As the eye makes landfall, if you're just to the southeast of that, that is where we expect the most wave and storm surge inundation, to the south of that eye as that eye comes on shore. And then you can see Fort Myers to Naples, generally about 8 to 12-foot storm surge there. So that is a life-threatening storm surge, needless to say, anything above that 5-foot. So we talk storm surge. So here's the normal sea level. Here's the coast. Here's the ocean surge, and here's the wind. So when we talk storm surge, we're not talking, an 8 to 10 foot wave. We're talking 8 to 10 foot above normally dry land. So that's why we want to really pay close attention to that, because here is what that it looks like. 6-foot storm surge, here is a house, 12-foot storm surge, which is being forecasted. Yeah, your house is going to be underwater. So if you are in those evacuation zones, I hope that those folks heeded to those warnings to get out when the officials told them to do so. Because obviously a 12-foot storm surge is going to put most houses and most properties in that inundated area underwater. So that is why we talk about a life-threatening storm surge being over 6 foot or higher, and most of those heavily populated areas are being forecasted at a 10 to as high as 15-foot storm surge. Now, when we talk about the Saffir-Simpson scale, there's been a lot of talk about a Category 6 hurricane. There's no such thing as about a Category 6 hurricane. The highest we go up to is Category 5. Now, throughout this storm's lifespan, we've seen it at Category 5 level twice, expecting to make a landfall as either a 4 or a 3. Now, you can see Category 3 hurricane, that is defined as a major hurricane. Anything over Category 3. 3, 4, that's where we have winds of 111 to 130 miles an hour. Generally speaking, a storm surge of 9 to 12 feet with that, and that is what online on what we're forecasting. And as we go towards Category 4, which is currently now, those winds are sustained at anywhere from 131 to 155 miles an hour as that storm surge, generally 13 to 18 foot. And then when we talk about catastrophic effects, well, you talk about Category 5 hurricane, upwards of 155 miles an hour plus, and upwards of an 18-foot storm surge. With Helene, we saw storm surge as high as 15 to 18 feet. So we're not going to be dealing with that with this storm, but needless to say, we're still dealing with a catastrophic storm surge. And yeah, no power, no water. Areas will likely be uninhabitable for weeks, if not months. And I think we're going to see that with this storm as we're going to be dealing with a Category 3 to a 4 hurricane as it makes landfall here over the next 10 to 12 hours. So again, the big story with this storm is definitely going to be the storm surge as we head into a landfall here over the next few hours. But that storm surge certainly means business. So that's why folks, they tell you to evacuate in those areas that are going to be inundated by water along the coast. Now, as we talk about the overall basin, as we're in the peak of hurricane season right now, we're going to be kind of on the downside of the season as we continue in the month of October here. And you can see the basin right now. There are a few areas that they're monitoring, but here's Leslie well out in the Atlantic. This is going to be a fish storm. This is going to track out to sea. So again, Milton is the main focus for throughout much of the basin right now, as it is a Category 4 storm, very dry across much of the northern half of the country. So as we take a look at the 2024 Atlantic hurricane names, you can see these are all the names we went through. Helene, Isaac, Joyce, Kirk. We're at Milton right now. The next storm name would be Nadine, followed by Oscar. Now, these names are rotated every 6 years, retired if the storm is catastrophic or deadly. So we most likely won't be seeing another Milton after this year. And obviously, Ernesto and you have Helene that are likely going to be retired once this cycle of names is used in another 6 years. So that is something to keep in mind too. The forecast for this hurricane season was going to be quite active, and we had that a little bit of a lull there, but boy, things have really begun to ramp up here over the course of the last few weeks. So hopefully we're not going further deep into that hurricane name. So again, the storm surge is going to be very bad with this storm system. And it looks like we have a few questions. Oh, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask on the link there as we continue to track this system throughout Florida. And there's the latest track. Again, this track is going to be updated here in the next few hours as the hurricane hunters are continuing to go in there, dropping dropsons and gathering that data so we can continue to forecast this storm as it approaches the coast. As we take a look at the radar once again, there's been a lot of tornadoes developing across portions of southeastern Florida with these outer bands. A ton of wind energy is being thrown onto the peninsula as this system begins to get closer. You can see the eye just off the coast there beginning to push towards that northeastern direction. Again, some of the models still have this storm making landfall in Tampa. The National Hurricane Center is tracked just to the south of Tampa, but you can see tremendous amounts of rain. It's actually been raining in Florida for the past few days ahead of this system, kind of hindering evacuation efforts. And as we take a look at the latest on Milton, as we take a look at the latest information on Milton, and we are still dealing with a Category 4 hurricane, and we're dealing with plenty of moisture, though, as we, we're going to be talking about upwards of 12 to 15 inches of rainfall as well with this system. And there's the latest on Milton. Again, not all that impressive as from a satellite standpoint as we had yesterday. Remember, yesterday it went through an eye wall replacement cycle where the eye wall replaces itself and then kind of reorganizes and re-intensifies, and that's what happened last night, weekend. And then there's that vivid eye last night. It was a Category 5, and then as it interacted with some drier air, there's some wind shear up here to the north. That's kind of shearing the system a bit, but when you talk about Category 3 hurricane versus a Category 5 hurricane hitting, there's not much. It's still going to cause catastrophic damage as it heads. So we're still dealing with a very dangerous hurricane here. You can see it moving northeast, 7 miles an hour, sustained winds at 145, winds gusting as high as 175 miles an hour, and the pressure has gone up a bit. You remember yesterday, we saw this thing sub 900. We were in the 800s as far as pressure is concerned. So typically when that pressure is rising, it means the storm system's kind of weakening to a degree, but nonetheless, barreling towards that Tampa, Sarasota area over the next few hours. As we take a look at the heavy rain, look at the heavy rain already off the Atlantic. You could see some heavy rain, as well as many areas around Tampa, Fort Myers, Miami, and all those bands lifting up from that outer moisture from this system. Again, a lot of tornadoes, the whole state under a tornado watch as those outer bands. If you're in that northeast quadrant of the system, that is typically where your strongest winds are, as well as where your tornado threat is with a landfalling tropical system. Now, the latest hurricane track, as I mentioned, Category 4 hurricane, expecting to make a landfall as a Category 3 sometime between about 10 tonight and midnight, expecting a landfall somewhere between about Tampa to Fort Myers is where the National Hurricane Center is kind of honing in on a track. There you see, right near Sarasota, pushing over into the Orlando area. I know Disney World closed. I know a lot of the parks in Orlando, Universal, have closed as well today, which is a good idea. And then that's going to pass over Milton as a Category 1 hurricane. So again, it's going to be one of those storms where both coasts feel the effects of this system, with, again, the western coast of Florida feeling the worst effects with that upwards of 15-foot storm surge. But again, that storm is going to mean business. It's going to be a quick mover, but it's going to be a rough 6 to 12 hours across the peninsula. And there's the latest storm surge map from the National Hurricane Center. Again, the area to focus in on is basically from Tampa on to Naples, where that life-threatening storm surge is likely going to take place. Again, with Sarasota to Fort Myers, where we expect that extreme surge of up to 15 foot. So that is very, very dangerous and life-threatening, and that is why the officials have told all those areas to evacuate along the coast if you're in a flood-prone storm surge area. But as I mentioned, though, look at that. Melbourne up to Daytona Beach, up to a 5-foot storm surge. Once that wind shifts direction out of the east, there's going to be a lot of water that's going to be thrown up along the eastern coast of Florida, so the Atlantic side. So a lot of damage is going to be occurring here, unfortunately, over the next 24 hours. So we'll have more on this and an updated forecast for weather in our area coming up on First Alert Weather, and coming up on Coast TV News at 5, 6, and 11, and I hope you join us then.